Hey, thanks again for joining us for another episode of Triple Play. Don't forget to
like and subscribe and share.
all that good stuff. And don't forget to support those that support us. You got Andy McCollum with Resource One at 636-458-1798. And Chris with CS Design. Give those guys a call at 573-436-3717. We also have a newbie. We now have Jeff Earhart Agency. So if you have some insurance needs, make sure you check out Jeff Earhart and State Farm at 314-821-5333. And check out and see what they can do.
Yeah.
Even if you got insurance, get a quote from them. So that said,
Who we got today?
Today we got Ed Martin.
Yeah, I'm excited about today's guest.
Yeah, Ed's been around a while in the political circles, but we'll talk a little bit about that, Ed, I'm sure. But one of the things that's going on right now is he's now in charge of the Eagle Council and Teen Eagles.
Yep.
They've got an event get ready to come up. And so if you haven't already signed up, you can go to their website, and we'll put the links and all that in here. But Ed, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background. You're obviously involved politically, and so tell us about where you grew up and your background and how you kind of got into politics. So
right. Well, thank you. Thanks, guys. Great to be with you. Thanks for being out there with a voice and being so prominent with your faith. To be frank, seeing the jerseys behind you and knowing Jesus is number one. It's a big deal. I appreciate it. It's a lot. You guys take it for granted because it's how you live, but it's in the public sphere, public square. It's great to see. So thanks for doing that. No, it's great to be on. Look. I'm a St. Louisan, okay, but how do you get there from where I grew up in New Jersey, okay? So I grew up in New Jersey, and I went away to college. When I was at college, I desperately always wanted to go overseas. I tried to join the military, and I had a heart murmur, and they wouldn't let me in. So I was about to join the Peace Corps. God help us, the Peace Corps would have never recovered. And I ended up getting 2 fellowships. One to Indonesia for a year, and one to go back to Indonesia for a second year. And it's a long story how I got that, but I went to Indonesia. I got there, and I was homesick. It's a Muslim country. I will never forget. In fact, I'll tell you something that I sometimes have talked about, not too often. I had the experience. I was born and raised, and I'm a lifelong Catholic. I am a Catholic today. I'm a member of the Catholic Church. But when I was Good Friday of that year in Indonesia, there was no church in the little village I was in. I was doing research, and I was miserably homesick. I'd been an athlete in college. I'd been all sorts of things. I thought I was, in love with the girl I was going to marry in college and all. And here I was in Indonesia, and on that Good Friday, I remember I didn't have a faith community. My family, my brother, my sister, nothing. And I remember having this extraordinary experience that I can still feel. I can feel the goosebumps now of suddenly realizing that I didn't need any of that. I didn't need any of them. And that I had with me a Bible, a study Bible, and I had this ability to be, present to Christ. And I tell people it's kind of like born again experience for me of this sort of the contact with Christ as God and Savior. So it was extraordinary. But the year was miserable. I was miserable in Indonesia, Muslim country, hot, everything. But actually, in retrospect, it was wonderful. It was eye-opening. But halfway through the year, I wrote a letter and I said, I got this second fellowship here. Can I please come? I know I turned it down. And they wrote back and said, we don't care. We gave you the money. Just stay overseas. And so I said, giddy up. And I wrote a letter back, and I went to Italy. And so I spent another year and it ended up staying 2 years in Italy. So
that's a nice swap.
I was going to say, that's really cool.
I went Indonesia, Italy, or Ireland. I was telling myself Iceland was off the table. But in terms of eyes, I was going to go. The eyes had it.
That's awesome.
So now I'm going to come back. Sorry, I'm losing my mic. My earpiece.
You're good.
I'm going to come back to go to school, and I want to study ethics, and I want to study bioethics. And so I'm like, where am I going to do that? And so there's a guy that comes through from St. Louis, comes through Italy. I was studying in Rome, and he's a Dominican priest named Kevin O'Rourke. He's now since deceased, and he's an expert on bioethics. And he gave a talk, and I went up to him and I said, I'm studying here in Rome. I've been in Rome, speak Italian, but I want to come home. And what do you think? And he said, you come to St. Louis. I'll help you get in the law school. I'll help you get into this PhD program and come to St. Louis. I said, I've never been to St. Louis. I'm from New Jersey. I was thinking like Fordham or BC, Georgetown. And he's like, no, St. Louis. And so I applied, and I drove out with my mother. I can still picture coming across Illinois with a rental truck with all my furniture to get an apartment. I lived in the Central West End. And as I get across I see the arch. And, you know, on TV, on the game of the week in baseball or anything, the arch looks really kind of, you know, now that I love it. But back then you're like, what is that? Like, who does that? And you come across the bottom of Illinois and you see it and it's like, wow. And you get closer, you're like, wow, like that thing works. You know, you guys know that. So, so now so that's how I got to St. Louis. And then I spent 25 years of my life in St. Louis. I did more, you know, awesome things for my faith and my family. You know, I just mess around with you guys. I hosted Rosa Parks in St. Louis when she came and asked to meet with John Paul II. Now I'm name dropping. John Paul II is a guy that I had worked for about a month, and I knew him really well. And so when they needed to get those two together, it was during the papal visit. You guys may remember it. And it was chaos, all sorts of things. Well, you know, it's a great story about McGuire meeting the Pope, by the way. It's another story. But anyway, and so I was in charge of an office that did pro-family and pro-life issues. And they said Rosa Parks wants to meet the Pope, and so I was the one that put that together. But so
that's
it
really
was,
cool. That's a great story.
I got here and I became a lawyer, but I went to work and I met my wife. We got married, had our 4 kids in St. Louis, and so I always wanted to go in and out of public and private life. I thought that I had something to contribute. So I ran for office a couple times, but I was chairman of the Missouri Republican Party. I was election board chairman in St. Louis. I was chief of staff to the governor of the state of Missouri. And then I practiced law in between and did lots of other stuff. So at the end of all that time in St. Louis, I went to work for Phyllis Schlafly, who nationally is an iconic figure. I mean, just one of the major conservative figures. And in the last years of her life, I was kind of a right-hand man. And then she named me to succeed her. And currently, that's my main job, is to run her network of organizations nationally. Before I got on with you guys, I was on with a woman from near Orange County, California, who's fighting for the pro-life, traditional marriage plank of the Republican Party of California. They're messing it up. So I do a lot of different things across the country, but I'm now running this organization that you have referred to. We have our annual event called Eagle Council coming up this weekend.
That's great.
That's great information. Ed, you mentioned wanting to travel.
Yeah.
And obviously you went into that thinking, I want to travel, but also it sounds like you also had a thought that you wanted to be involved with people and society as a whole, like government, all that stuff before you went to college, it sounds like. Can you attribute anything like why you had a desire to travel, why you had a desire to interact with people as your job all day, every day?
Yeah, you're making me think in a way I didn't expect.
That's all right.
No, it's good. Yeah, it's good. You know, my father's a small town lawyer, and you know, you'll smile when I say this. A lot of guys follow their dad's footsteps. I mean, it happens, right? And so I always sort of had some leaning towards being a lawyer in the sense that I thought my father did he's alive, he's a wonderful man, and he did a great thing. But I didn't want to go back to my small town, as you sort of mentioned. I wanted to go out and see the world and all. So I don't know. You know, this is a kind of constant conversation amongst people, I think, and especially your friends, maybe your you know, my wife and family. Are you the kind of person that sees a vision of what you're going to be, like, you know, a 10-year plan? I never had that. What I knew was I was pretty fired up this morning when I realized I was talking to you guys, and I thought, that's cool. I've never hit with these guys. That's going to be something for me. And I live kind of close to what's happening in front of me. I don't do a good job of planning. My wife gets mad about it. I mean, but
I'd say you're for all intents and purposes, I would say that your game plan is working out pretty well. Just kind of going to the next day.
Yeah. Well, but here's what I was going to say about that. I mean, you really got me thinking. That's a good indication of our conversation. Early in my life, I had this great blessing, a sense that I was called. And I used to tell people, I'm like, am I called to be a priest? I was a young Catholic kid. Am I called to, what is this about? And I believe that we're all called to something. You have to sort of learn to listen. God's calling us to something. And for me, that feeling was always outward generated. I try to write. I've written about 5 or 6 books. I wrote columns for years. But writing is hard because you kind of got to sit inside yourself a lot. I've always felt like that there's a drive in me to be outward. To your point about interacting with people, and ultimately, if you're wounded enough, you know what, and I mean that in the sense of sin and life, you just realize that around us, everybody's the same. The most wounded, you can't be more wounded. We're all wounded with sin. So it's like 100% we're wounded. And you think, oh, that guy's homeless or that guy's alcoholic. No, not but for the grace of God. The grace of God gets me from there. He could be from here to me in a minute if God wants it, and if he'll be open. So there's a part of me that I think when you really hear and are blessed, it's not me. I mean, I'm given the grace. Then you are drawn to other people. I like a good sunset and I like a good meal, obviously, but I just think the things around us that are valuable. Here's a quick story. One time I badmouthed John Boehner. I was like, John Boehner, that guy, he was the Speaker of the House at times, and he's a charming guy. He's a wonderful guy in person, and he's just a heck of a neat guy, and he's Catholic, and he's, I don't think he beats his dog, but he wasn't living up to what we wanted. And I said, John Boehner's a such and such, and Phyllis said, wait. She's like, what he does is rotten. What he does is bad. But be careful, because ours is not to judge. Even Nancy Pelosi is made in the image and likeness of God. I mean, it's tough for me to take, but it's true. And so that's a part of what I think drew me to some of the public service stuff.
Mm.
That was a great answer.
Yeah, I was going to say that was a really good answer. And that really, and when I'm listening to you, I'm just thinking, okay, this is a guy that I would want in charge of something like a Teen Eagle. So I can see why she would want you to take over these things. So how did that relationship develop? I mean, obviously in the later years of her life, you were her right-hand man. I'm sure there was, sounds like a lot more, some mentorship that kind of happened there.
Yeah.
So,
and maybe before you answer that, maybe just describe maybe who Phyllis is to our listeners.
Yeah. Phyllis Schlafly passed away in 2016. She was 92. And she was born in St. Louis over towards the Loop in a second-story apartment. Her father and mother, they had 2 kids. Her father lost his job in the Great Depression, never really got another job. So she grew up with not abject poverty, but pretty poor. She married, her name was Stewart, she married Schlafly. And now that people know the beer Schlaflys, but the Schlafly, the father of the beer guy and Phyllis's father, and one other, there were 3 brothers, the Schlafly brothers, that were at that time very successful business guys. Daniel was one, and Phyllis married into that family. And so they were a successful family. I mean, they were probably pretty wealthy, but they were just, a stable family. And so she married into that. And then she had 6 kids rapidly, and she wanted to have children, and she had 6 kids, and she was here's where life is interesting. When she was 14, a teacher of hers in the public schools said to her, you're going to write a paragraph every single day, every student was. And Phyllis would say, that's when she became a writer. And the rest of her life, she was writing a column 2 days before she died on her deathbed. She was writing a column about the Mexico trip that Donald Trump was taking to be. She was a writer. Now, the rest of her life, then, she was concerned about politics and America's future. And so I have to kind of shorten this because I could talk all day about it. But in the 1940s and 50s, if you were awake, the threat was the Soviet communists. And they were communists. They hated Christians. They hated them. And they were coming for them. And so her whole thing started from her faith. She was Catholic. That she saw this and she was organizing to stay strong against the Soviets. And a lot of Americans were like, well, the Soviets, how bad could they be? I mean, we might get along with them. And they're like, no, they hate Christians. They hate God. And so that was where she cut her teeth. And then during this period, she used to testify before Congress, and people would say, are you a lawyer? And she'd say no. And then they'd sort of shake their heads. So she had worked her way through Washington University undergrad, and her job during that time was testing ammo at a range in North St. Louis where they were making bullets during World War II. That's
crazy.
True story. Yeah. And then, so she goes back to law school at WashU and graduates number 2 in her class. So she doesn't have to be asked if you're a lawyer. And along the way, she fine-tuned a couple of things that are actually historic in the history of America and actually the West. One of them was she was the first person who could organize in politics and unite people that not fighting about who's going to hell and who's going to heaven. Because until Phyllis did it, you wouldn't stand next to a Baptist if you were a Catholic. And if you were a Baptist, you wouldn't stand next to a Mormon. You wouldn't stand. These were not acceptable things. And Phyllis said, hey, wait, we're being threatened by these people that want to take away our families. We got to stand arm in arm. And she did that. And then when she did it in the early 70s and succeeded in beating the ERA, it's called, this was a Equal Rights Amendment, in the late 70s, Jerry Falwell and the Moral Majority and Ronald Reagan took that model, and the conservative religious people ended up sticking together. And that was one thing she did. The second thing that she did was she really did she really was the counterweight, both politically and I think more broadly, of the feminists. It feels weird to us now because it's an onslaught of just lunacy, transgender, everything. But there was a period where the feminists were ascendant in the 60s and 70s in America, and Phyllis was the counterweight. And she was saying things like, and she used to give speeches, and she'd say, I had it all, just not all at once, meaning she was a housewife for one part of her life and a mother for another part. And she didn't, when people said I want it all, she said, it's not, you can't have it all, but not all at once. You've got to make these. And she was an extraordinary counterweight in that period. And the last thing I would say, that in this environment that is really hard to describe, almost everybody in politics is sold out. I know it's going to sound a little dramatic, even our guys, even our side, because they need to get paid. They need to survive. And so you got to go find money. And if your budget for your think tank is $100 million, you got to go find $100 million a year. There's a lot of people you got to ask. And one of them says, hey, just go a little light on that, TikTok ban. You're like, maybe I'll just go a little. That's how life is. We can wish it was different, but that's how life is. Phyllis, because of how she set things up, she never needed anybody. Her husband paid the bills for her family. Phyllis was very, very frugal. So she was consequently, she never sold out. I can go with you and we can look at somebody we like a lot, and he's a good guy. And I'm not saying anything, this is life. And you say, well, on this issue, he didn't say as strong. And it probably relates to some way that it had to happen. Phyllis never had to do that. And that's an extraordinary gift to the country because of the way she was able to maintain that through line. Look, after the Soviet Union fell, she didn't say, oh, wouldn't it be great if we made all of Russia into America? No, she said, the communists are gone. Good. We'll see what they do. But the real threat in the world is the Chinese communists. And starting in the early 90s, she started writing about the Chinese communists, saying the threat is not Russia being corrupt. We got corruption in America. The threat is the communists who want to destroy us. There's a difference between being corrupt or misguided and being, a threat to America. And she had that kind of clarity.
Maybe this is a good transition into Teen Eagles, but it sounds like maybe these are the people that you're bringing up into politics that don't have the baggage associated with these politicians today. Is that something that Teen Eagles is? Yeah,
the Teen Eagles is one piece of what we do, and we're proud of it. But I mean, I think to your point that's a young person's thing. Our organization sort of is spread out over a bunch of areas, and I would say that's kind of one piece. I'll go one further with you. I have a bunch of kids. My oldest is a sophomore in college, and my youngest is in 6th grade. And a girl, 2 boys, and another girl. And I do think we have an extraordinary challenge going on, and addressing it through things like Teen Eagles, things like this weekend, trying to educate. But it's I've never seen anything like what's happening in terms of the power of what I call the narrative machine. The narrative machine is a combination of big tech and big media and working with big government to tell us what's true, and it's really tough right now. So, I should have said this. One of the things that Phyllis prided herself on, which is sort of our tagline, is we're conservatives, but we know politics. Meaning, you could be right and sincere all day long, but you got and succeed. So what's the way to make progress, right? How do you figure out what to do to make progress? That's what I think we have to, she would say, when it comes to kids, young people, it's just such a challenge because of the power of what's going on and how they're doing it to us. And we could talk for days on that, but I think Teen Eagles is important. I think, we're optimistic, but it's really tough, really tough.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's a different culture that we're in today than ever before, and I would agree with you. When you just take a step back and watch the culmination of so many entities kind of teaming up together to feed a narrative, it really makes it tough. It is brutal, and 90% of the time, the narrative they're feeding is completely a false narrative. It's not just a narrative; it's a false narrative. So,
and I would say this. Again, we're all sinners, right? The three of us could line up and start saying how we failed, but we also now have, I think, enough time under our belt, and we're saying, we've learned in our lives. But the ways that the tools are taking our kids away from God are extraordinary. Pornography is so powerful on young people. And it's not just powerful because you watch pornography and it's just, it's not good for the participants or yourself. It pulls you away from understanding relationships, right? Understanding. And because one of the things they love to do is gut the family. So they say, well, anything goes in a family. We all know families that are divorced. It's not the end of the world, but it's not ideal. Let's not lie about it and say it's ideal, right? I mean, so they pull us, the culture is pulling us away from what is good for us. And one time I did an interview. I ran for Congress in 2010. I did an interview on a Christian station, and I said, Obamacare, it's like building a wall around us, and we're trapped. And I don't care about whether healthcare. I care about people getting to heaven. And there's a wall around us. And after I got off the thing, one of my supporters, might have been Dennis. Dennis might have called me, and he said, "Hey, relax. If God wants to go through 50 feet of concrete, he'll do it. Don't think you're that cool that you can do it." And my point there is that God can cut through this. But right now we're watching the pulling away of young people from the things that are anchoring in at least openness to Christ, if not actually knowing Christ.
Mm.
Yeah, it's so upside down that it's almost impossible to see the truth.
So what are all the different organizations or things that are underneath you now with what you do?
So Phyllis was a kind of a social entrepreneur. She started social and nonprofit organizations. We have Eagle Forum Education and Legal Defense Fund, which is kind of our biggest umbrella organization. That's a 501c3, does education and advocacy on all the issues we care about. That's our biggest organization. Then tucked underneath that, we've got Phyllis Schlafly Eagles, which is a C4, which can do a little more politics. We've got an entity, the only group in the country that's formed explicitly to take an issue inside a party, Republican Party. It's called the RNC for Life, Republican National Coalition for Life, working on the life issue and the platform planks. The power. I love this recently, guys. I've been talking to folks. In fact, after this, I'll be talking to someone. Words are so powerful, right? Words are powerful, not just because they're powerful, but because in the beginning was the Word. Right? I mean, the Word was made flesh, not the interesting thought and a concept. And the Word was made flesh. So words matter. And in our culture, especially, they wanted to take out all the words that matter, pro-life and pro-family. And Phyllis set up an organization, and we focus just on keeping the platforms of the Republican Party strong because it's important. We know the words matter, and they hold us, they teach us, they bind us together. So Phyllis, at one point, she realized that her kids were not being taught to read correctly. They were using sight reading instead of phonics. So she wrote a book and created a little entity that pushed reading. We still have that going. I mean, you pick a topic that is in the sphere of where politics and family hit, and we will have started either an organization or a project to focus on that.
So that reading thing's cool. That's the right way to do it, by the way. You guys are doing it right. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you see with? I mean, obviously you're talking about the Republican Party, and you've been involved in at least the state level now, and now more national through this organization. What do you see going on right now? I mean, we obviously got Trump, who's out there. He's the big name. You've got DeSantis and Vivek, and then there's kind of the Nikki Haley, and everybody else is kind of underneath that. What are your thoughts? What do you see going on? Do you think Trump will make it to the election? Do you think he'll be disqualified? What do you foresee?
An election?
Yeah.
So that's a whole. Let's do that as a separate question. Look, I came of age in the in the 90s in terms of Republican politics, and I, we all at the time, September 11th was just the other day, and we all went through that, and I was in St. Louis that day. I was actually working for a judge in Kansas City, but we were in St. Louis. I can picture Katie Couric said that morning that one of the other targets, there's some planes out there still. One of the other targets is the new courthouse, the Eagleton Courthouse in St. Louis is a prospective target. I'm like, we're in the building. And everyone's like, time to go.
That's
and
crazy.
so we got out. But I came of age, and we I think now we look back and say that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan we were misled. That's how I'd say it. I have a lot of friends, and my brother served over in the wars. I have a hard time calling it a mistake that people fought so hard for, but it was a mess, right? When we look back, but I came of age in the modern period, or my maybe adult period, starting in 08 and 09. I ran for office in 10. That was a Tea Party, right? Where people were like, we're sick of this. We're sick of the direction. I would argue broadly, guys, that from 1930 or so until 2008, in America, you said the American dream is pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you'll have a chance. You could do it. Anyone can do it. You can come up from your boot. In 08, people looked up and said they just bailed out all the bank top guys, and they stuck us, and they started to say over and over, it doesn't look like everyone can pull themselves up. It looks like the game is rigged. And from 08 until today, I think there's a growing sense among the American people that the system, I'm not saying everybody, some people are born with a silver spoon in their mouth, right? I mean, and I'm not begrudging them. I'm saying, but in general, America made it possible. So the Republican Party, I was chairman of the Missouri Party, and therefore I sat on the RNC for 2 years, the Republican National Committee. And I got inside there and I thought, wow, this is going to be amazing, right? These are the people that run the party. These people are going to be, impressive. And I got in the room and there's 168 people, 167 plus me. And what they cared about was how big the cocktail party was going to be later in the day. And I was like, holy cow, this is not different than anywhere else. The quality of the people is not different than anyone else. Not bad, not all terrible, not all evil, but in terms of a vision for the future, as the country, this is 2013, the country's hollowing out, the jobs are going nowhere. Everybody feels the game is rigged. We're watching the immigration question then overrunning us, let alone now, and no one's leading. Everyone's just sort of blah. Washington, D.C. is getting more and more wealthy and powerful. And so today, Trump has tapped into that. Now, he's an extraordinary talent, too, and I'm a Trump I was an early Trump supporter. I still am a Trump supporter. I think Trump is necessary. But he tapped into something and changed the whole direction of the Republican/conservative movement. When I was on the RNC, if you had said, you know what, these multilateral trade deals where we get in a room and we have 6 of us and we sign one of these trade deals where everybody can work everyone together. If you had said that kind of free trade is bad for America, you would have been thrown out of the room. Like they would have been like, you're one of those, socialists. And now today, there's not a Republican of any weight that would say those deals, because they were used against us. They cheated us on it. If you, in 2015, if you were on the RNC, there was like 5 of us that said, let's close the border. If you 2015, and this is a harder one, if you were one of the people that said, hey, you know what? Don't tell me to stop talking about abortion. I think it's a life. Don't tell me to stop talking about marriage. I think it matters. You would have been like, well, you guys are on the edge. Now, the Republican Party is dramatically pro-America, is the phrase I use, aimed at us and our values. Now, is it enough to sustain a majority and govern? I think it is if they don't cheat. We'll get to that point. But I think that's what we have to argue about. We have to talk about. But the Republican Party's moved fairly dramatically, and you still see the fight within the party. But we are in a period where it's a kind of populist party where people are fed up and they want someone on their side. And that's what Trump has tapped into also.
Well, I think, and to your point, one of the things that I see, I think the Democrats had this happen earlier when Obama kind of supporting. You got the Rashida Tlaibs and the AOCs on, and at first there was 4 or 5 of them, and they thought, oh, they're not really going to direct the party. And of course, when AOC first introduced the Green New Deal, everybody laughed at it. I remember everybody laughing, and now it's through, right? A version of it has now been passed. So what they laughed at, even in their own party. My point of that is you kind of saw that same shift when Trump came up. You had just a couple other senators who were elected at that time who were more pro-American, whatever, MAGA, whatever you want to call it. But they were, the Jim Jordans and guys like that who were, and then shortly after that, the next election cycle, you saw more added to it. And so now it seems like they're starting to get to every election cycle more and more being added to the ranks per se in Washington, D.C. And these guys are more motivated to see change in a positive way that I think the Republican Party has in a long time. Maybe you think differently. I don't know what you see, but that's kind of the things I see.
I think that's right. I think that's right. But I mean, what I would say to you is that the thing that I think is most disturbing to me is what I think many Americans see, which is over the last 30 years, the centralization of wealth and power has dramatically shifted to Washington. When you just mentioned the Green New Deal, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which passed last year under Biden, and it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions and billions of dollars being spent to just passed out money. In the White House, there's a $760 million fund that is just being distributed to anyone who is sympathetic to the climate change stuff. And my point is not that that's good or bad. I think it's bad myself. But what my point is the power of picking winners and losers is now Washington's. And when that happens a lot, there's two things that happen. One, you either buck the trend and you have a hard time, which we can make a list of industries that said, we're not going to get lobbyists and try to influence what you're doing and get subsidies or be protectionist, and then they get gutted. Or you play ball and they own you. I mean, not own is a little strong, but they have more control over you. So we've seen that dramatically, and people are more and more disgusted by it, by the power. Joe Biden, here's one story for you guys. Joe Biden and his son and his brother and his sister and his granddaughter and all, making tens of millions of dollars from influence peddling. The only thing that's really shocking about that is they were sloppy. It was sloppier than most. The only thing that's shocking about it is that people don't realize they all do it. They're all doing it. If your brother's a senator, you're a multimillionaire. That's the way it goes. And out here, you could come out here, pick any senator, your favorite ones, and you'll find out, his wife's got a really good job. Does she have the qualifications to make $750,000? She does, because she's married to a senator. The swamp has gotten so swamped up, and that's one of the reasons I think Trump is successful too, is because he doesn't need them. He didn't need them for money. He didn't need them for, but that corruption, I think the American people feel it. And then they use their power against us. And COVID is where we saw the machinery. You were like, what? But COVID now laid bare what happened. And now you're looking around. Guys, it's one of the things I haven't seen somebody yet do, which I would like to see. A thoughtful, serious African-American who says, guys, we were talking about how the federal prosecution was targeting groups in the 90s. And by the way, there's a Biden crime bill that did it. But, now you're complaining. But you look at what's happening. I represent 3 January 6th defendants. And what's happening in the federal court system to American citizens, what they're doing to Trump, it's so far out of the norm for what lawyers do. And yet you don't hear any lawyers objecting. Like, there should be, the Bar Association of St. Louis should be marching on the federal courthouse to say, guys, we're all lawyers. We signed on to be officers of the court, even though we don't agree on politics. We don't do this to each other. And everybody's silent. Why? Because if you raise your voice, you get whacked. And so just keep your head down and keep taking care of your family. By the way, I'm not judging anybody. I'd probably be smarter if I did more of that. But I think that's what the reality is.
Right. And so you're actually involved in with the January 6th stuff. Have you been able to watch any of the film that has been released showing?
How'd you know that? Did I tell you that? I have watched it. So as a lawyer on the cases, I have been given access to the Department of Justice, what they give our clients, which is a very little bit. I've actually never looked at that on purpose. I have a co-counsel who's actually trying the cases, and I didn't look at that because it's under a really harsh protective order. Like, if you were bin Laden, you'd have a similar protective order, because that's how ramped up these lunatics are in the government. They think that the January 6th was like bin Laden, and they want to sell that to the country, and they're doing it all the time. So, but funny you mentioned that. All of the rest of the January 6th video is over at the House now. The Republicans have it, and I went in months ago and looked at a lot of it, but I just went in this week because they changed their system, and I went in this week week on Monday and Tuesday, and I spent about 6 hours in there, 2 or 3 hours each day, and I requested a bunch of the video. And no kidding, within a half an hour of us getting on the air, I just got it all. And so I've got it because I'm trying to investigate one aspect of what happened on January 6th that I saw. And when I started digging into it, I can't really tell you the details yet. When I started digging into it, I realized that something was fraudulent there. There's something going on that doesn't make sense. And so I dug into it. So I have looked at all that. I mean, look, you guys will like this. I mean, if you had I'm from Jersey. If you had the Jets and the Giants play football, right? And they played football and one team won and it was really close and they felt like the ref stole it, I can guarantee you there'd be fights in the parking lot afterwards. In fact, because Giants and Jets fans are kind of morons, they'd fight anyway, even no matter what the score. But so when I was at the Capitol on January 6th and I went past the Capitol, I was at the Trump speech. I walked up Constitution and I went back to my office, which is not far away. And I looked at it. There were some people that got out of control. I mean, rioting, I think you can use the word rioting, but insurrection? Like insurrection? I mean, this is insanity. And they've charged people with felonies under a theory that they're bin Laden. And this is crazy to me. I mean, again, if you break a window, you get charged. If you push a cop, you're going to get charged. That we're all on board on that. But if you walk through the building and you get charged with a felony that could get you 20 years walking through the building because somebody in the media and in the Department of Justice wants to call it an insurrection, this is dramatically un-American.
Who brings no weapons to an insurrection?
And that was my question. That was always my question. I mean, they're like insurrection. I was like, that was like a lot of people upset. And then if that were the case, what about what they did to Supreme Court? They're in the different rulings that, especially the left didn't like. They've gone into the Supreme Court and taken it over just like they did, Congress several times. And that's a protected place. Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, I think yours is the best one. Is if Republicans and conservatives, if they were having an insurrection, we wouldn't care. By definition, we wouldn't care what the rules were. We would say, oh, you're saying we can't have a gun? Well, if you're going to have an insurrection, you'd have weapons, people. And again, I was there for all of it. Whenever you have a gathering of a large size, especially on the conservative side, because I was a Tea Party founder, I founded the St. Louis Tea Party with some of the folks then, you're going to get a fringe set of characters that are upset, angry, strange. That's true, right? So there's some people that show up at a thing and they're like, oh, what's that about? And the guy with the hat and all that. But again, what's happened is not so much calling it a name. That's bad enough and insulting enough. They're using the law dramatically to set up the predicate to really hammer people with, and then to say, see, and it's kind of like, well, Nancy Pelosi admitted it once. She said something. She said it's called the wraparound smear. You say something, then the media covers it, and then after it's in the newspaper, you refer to it because it's in the newspaper. Like that was reported. Wall Street Journal said there was an insurrection, and you said that's a Republican paper. And meanwhile, they're saying it because Nancy Pelosi stood there and said it was an insurrection. So that's what they did, and then again. Bad enough if you make people feel bad about it or about their candidate, about who they believe, but putting them in jail? Like 20 years in jail for this? This is truly stuff that's not recognizable for America.
Yeah, egregious.
Yeah, well, on top of that, the egregiousness of it, yes, but also the fact that you had months prior the exact same situations playing out in other cities, and you have the American public saying and seeing nothing happened there and something's happening here. It's so in your face. We don't care what you think. We're doing this no matter what, that people are like, what?
Well, and that goes back to what I said after 08. People look up and they say the game's rigged. Because they're seeing two otherwise similar situated things, and they're like, why is one set being targeted, right? And they're starting to say, in their heart, they're starting to say, I don't agree with the direction of this. Now, again, let me pause. The problem is the power of the media and big tech working with government has been able to take certain lies and convince 30 or 40% of the public that that's the truth. So much so that they'll be vehement. You guys know I'm stuck with it. You guys can probably fake it like you don't have a thought. I go to events, people say, "Are you for Trump?" Well, I've written 4 books on Trump. Right? I have a New York Times bestseller called "The Conservative Case for Trump." I can't hide from it. And people will not speak to you, and they'll say he's evil. And I'm like, "What's evil?" Like, here's the thing. I'm a conservative. Trump actually wasn't very conservative on, for example, gay rights. He was pretty liberal.
Right.
Trump wasn't very conservative on spending. He was pretty roped into the spending. Trump wasn't conservative on criminal justice. Those are three big areas. Now, was he conservative on judges? Yeah. Was he conservative on some appointments? Yeah. But not he didn't do a lot of things I wanted. So where's he? Like, where's he racist? Where's he Hitler? And they're like, oh, I just know he is. I know he is. I'm like, what do you know? And they know what they've been brainwashed about, and it's really effective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I had that when he was first running, that stuff started coming out, especially with the whole thing about special needs kids. I found that very, very interesting because my grandpa, I didn't know who Trump was growing up most of my life until my grandpa would talk about his brother Lester up in New York, and he was in charge of the Cerebral Palsy Foundation up there. And Trump was a huge supporter and a big backer of that. So, like, that's the only reason I remember is my grandpa would be like, yeah, my brother, he holds these events at Trump's hotels, and Trump brings in all the celebrities, and they donate to helping out cerebral palsy. And then all of a sudden he's running for election. They're like, yeah, he's, making fun of special needs kids. And I'm going, that doesn't sound like the guy who I've been for the last 20 years, 15 years, 20 years hearing about raising funds and taking care of this foundation, but basically taking it on his back. So
go ahead.
No, I'm not trying.
Well, I was just gonna say that I think you were talking about the news stories about false, the wraparounds. The newspaper says this, well, this says that. I think that's our country is a direct correlation of how lazy we are.
Yeah.
That story about the doing this when he was making fun of the guy with cerebral palsy, that took me 15 seconds to research the fact that he does that with everybody. That's just how that's how he makes fun of people. He does that same thing. It took 15 seconds to realize that he actually wasn't making fun of that. So it just, I think there's some laziness on part of the American public.
I don't disagree with you, but I just would say this is that, I consider that, a part of our original sin, right? Our sinfulness is that people are going to fall victim to these things. And so I agree with you. The problem is right now, the media and big tech are so sophisticated about it. I mean, look, big tech is not just changing how you think. It's changing your brain chemistry. It's getting our kids' brains rewired. That's real. And so you say, who's in charge of wiring your kids' brains? Some Silicon Valley scientists, computer scientists. So, guys, a couple of things on Trump. You say, when you have kids, you learn some of this especially, but Trump's father was a Christian. So is Trump, I guess, a Protestant Christian. In New York City, they belonged to a church called Marble Collegiate Church, and Trump went to that church every Sunday until about 1982 or 3. Every Sunday, his father made him go every Sunday, and then when his father died, he kept going. And you say, "Holy cow, really? Every Sunday?" And the reason why was, in large part, was there was a pastor there. His name was Norman Vincent Peale. Norman Vincent Peale is famous for writing the book, The Power of Positive Thinking, and extraordinary book. But if you go back and read that book, it's the direct opposite of what we have today. We have all these people that do self-help books, Atomic Habits, all these kinds of things. Go read Norman Vincent Peale again. Every other line is scripture. Every other line is Christ's name. And, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I mean, everything. And that's what Trump was raised on. Trump said the number one influence in terms of was that. So, yes, do I think some of this stuff is imperfect? Sure. I wish he hadn't gotten married 3 times and all that. On the other hand, I know plenty of people, friends, that got divorced. And this is a real tragedy, right? It's also a mystery, and it's also we've got to do better and all that. But so after that, though, you guys know, if you're in public life, even small, a smidgen, and you're a jerk to somebody, and you go as big as Trump went, that guy's going to get prime time. If he was a racist to the bellhop, that guy would have had prime time. If he was saying slurs about Hispanics, none of that. Right? None of that. Not many of us could live up to the scrutiny standard that Trump's had to go through. So anyway, but ultimately, someone came up to Phyllis Schlafly and said, "You're for Trump. How can that be? He's so coarse." And she said with a big smile, "It's kind of a coarse culture, isn't it?" Meaning, you can run your pastor for president. He's not going to win, right? So, you can wish it was different, but here we are. And who's going to directionally give this country more opportunity, again, to flourish in the tradition that we want?
Right. Wow. What do you think of DeSantis? Just a little side note. I'm curious to see your thoughts on him.
We had DeSantis come and speak at one of our Eagle events in Naples, Florida, about when he was in Congress, and he's as impressive as you'd expect. I mean, look, Yale baseball player, and Yale's a little bit less shine on it now, but it's still Division I, and he was a good ball player. He's a captain of the team. He played ball. He's a serious guy, and he joined the military and served, I think, Harvard Law School. He's not as naturally charismatic in a room as some of them are. I mean, some of them like Bill Clinton. Here we go, name dropping. When Bill Clinton met the Pope, and I was in the room with him, Bill Clinton just turned it on like he was a lifelong Catholic. And I mean, Bill Clinton was a master. He was a master of whether it was a lie or not. It's a different thing. He was a masterful sort of presence in the room. DeSantis doesn't have that. However, DeSantis has been fearless as a governor. He's been fearless. And I respect that more. I was chief of staff to the governor. It's hard to be a good governor. My governor, Matt Blunt, was a really good governor. He was also fearless, but he only served one term because he got sick of the intensity. DeSantis deserves a ton of credit. I mean, real serious stud for doing what he did. But running for president is different than anything else. It's just a totally different. It's like playing a different sport. I mean, you play you're a Major League Baseball player, and then you got to go play football. It's possible. It's possible.
But it's a different ball. Yeah, maybe.
It's a different game. And DeSantis has got caught by that in the sense that he's not naturally a challenger in a way that's sort of memorable. Vivek is more natural. So I'm sorry for how it's played out because I like DeSantis so much, but that star did not rise, and it's not going to rise at this point.
When you said Vivek, what do you think of him?
A lot of the conservatives, my friends, are unhappy because when he was younger, he was liberal. And I say anybody who will come to the right positions and then live with it, I'm for, right? And so I've been impressed with how he communicates. I've been impressed with his message. It's hard. I'm a white guy, right? That's the least popular thing you can be. I'm a white guy conservative. I must be really rotten. And I want to say, hey, my party is running an awesome black guy, running an Indian woman, running an Indian dude, like my party. Your party's still running white guys. Gavin Newsom's a white guy. Yeah. I guess they got Kamala, right? So I like his energy. I like how he's done it. He mentioned some things, guys, that are so smart. I know I'm pointing to something that's a little bit narrow to talk about, but Vivek talked about the Monroe Doctrine, and the Monroe Doctrine will celebrate its 200th anniversary in December of this year. And it was President James Monroe who said, not stay out of our hemisphere, you bad people. He said, your system of governing is not compatible with us in our hemisphere, therefore you can't come. System. And what Vivek said was Chinese communism is not compatible with the American system. They're too dishonest. They cheat too much. They hate God, all that. And so he brought that up, Vivek, and it's been awesome. So I've been impressed with him. I think he's running for VP or for a cabinet position. But you guys mentioned earlier, the wild card is, can they take Trump off the ballot? And I don't believe they can. But I think most Americans don't remember what's possible, and anything is possible. And I'm afraid of what could happen. I really am. I'll be honest about that.
Yeah. What about Biden? Do you think he'll even make it to the election? I mean, that's been a concern. You see his health. I mean, the other day he was in Vietnam and he couldn't. He's already had issue, but he couldn't even get his sentences out.
Honestly, I'm 37 years old. That was the most embarrassed I've ever been to be an American citizen. Having your president ushered off a stage while he's speaking. I'm like, what? Yeah. We're not that's what are we doing?
Yeah.
So the short answer is this: it's really interesting to tell you guys. I mean, in the world of politics, there's nothing like a U.S. senator. A U.S. senator cannot be told to do anything. They generally are almost immune from losing an election, so they can do whatever they want, and no one tells them anything other than you're a great guy. He had that life for 50 years. I mean, he was VP for 8 of those, but 50 years. And then he ran for president. And he's not a smart guy. I don't mean to be a jerk. I'm not a smart guy. I mean, but he's not a bright guy. He just is. And here's the thing. They told him you can't run, and you never win, He kept running. And he ran, and now this time he won somehow from his basement, right? And you're like, and now they're trying to tell him, Joe, it's not your time. It's not your time. He's like, they told me that for 30 years. They kept saying, don't do this, don't do this. I'm not doing that. And he and his wife like the power. All the people around him like the power. I don't think he'll yield. I don't think he'll yield in like a Lyndon Johnson way, where they came down and they said, look, boss, you can't win. You got to step aside. I don't think Biden will do that. And I don't think that anyone is rising with enough. RFK Jr. is very popular, and he's probably at 15 or 17%, but they're going to starve him out, because remember, it's big tech and big media that work with big government. So they're going to starve out the oxygen. So I don't know how he gets there. So I think he's going to run unless he doesn't function at that point. And I think there'll be a push to make that argument by some of the Democrats. You're already hearing it. So there is a civil war going on. It's not in the Republican Party. The civil war is in the Democrat Party, because the people in charge of the insanity, the border, for example, there's no normal Democrat. I have some normal Democrat friends. They're like, I can't do this border thing. 1.2 million coming in the country, and they're not coming in with like their crucifix and building a family and having 4 kids. They're coming in with their buddies from Africa and from Pakistan, and they're coming in, and people are like, what is this? Like, what's happening? So the Democrat Party is going to fight over how liberal they want to be. And here's the real trick, guys. Think of it this way. The Democrat Party has become the party of the screaming liberal women. It's like TikTok women. That's the party. Now, some guys have to stay because I don't know what, they're stuck with it, or they're married to somebody, or they want to date somebody or something. But the other party is the Republican Party that's saying, hey, let's try to make opportunity for everybody. I think if we can have a fair election, which is up for grabs, we've got a real shot to really, really win big. But I think Biden's going to try to stay. He's going to stay on the ballot unless something happens to him.
Yeah, I agree. He's going to stay on the ballot. I just was curious if he'll make it to the election. I think I don't think the Democrats want RFK, but I think if Biden were to go down, I think he becomes automatic, because nobody is going to come close to his care. I mean, as you said, I've seen some polls having him as high as almost 30%, 26, 28% in their party.
No, let me tell you that. I mean, with all due respect, you're right if it was about who is talented and has charisma. But you're wrong in the sense that the Democrats long ago fixed their system of picking the president much more than Republicans. We actually have a somewhat open system where if you can win Iowa and you can get rolling, you can win the delegates. The Democrats have a system where they have super delegates. Remember, Bernie was gaining ground a few years ago, and Bernie had a path to win. He won some places, and then they iced him because they have super delegates. And super delegates are like Obama and Eric Holder and every cabinet secretary from the previous administration, and they will have the ability to manage it. But that's my point. You're going to be in a civil war. RFK Jr. is going to say, look at my polling against Trump. I can win the whole country. And RFK Jr. would win the whole country. There's a whole bunch of Republicans that would say he's good on the COVID stuff. I'll take a flyer with him. But they will not allow that to happen, and they'll push on. They won't let it be Kamala. But if Joe Biden got sick or got incapacitated, or they could convince him, there'd be a double switch. They'd have to get somebody. Kamala would have to. And I'm being serious. I'm going to say something. I don't know if you've heard this before. I think Kamala Harris has a problem. Alcohol, maybe. It's not original. Someone else said it, but I've watched it. I know enough friends that have alcohol problems or drugs. She got to the big leagues to be an attorney general of California and a senator. That's not minor leagues. This is big leagues. You got to play big league ball. You got to be a player. And now she gets to be vice president. She's incoherent, and she's incoherent all the time. It's very bizarre. So I think they'll find a way to push her out. And that if Biden goes down or will quit, then they have to come in. And it'll be Gavin Newsom. It could be Pritzker from Illinois. And you say, why would they do that? And the answer is they know they've got 45% of the vote. They're just trying to get to 51 or 50 plus a few. And they'll look at it and say, big states. Biden was a good pick for them because they wanted to go into neighborhoods and say to guys, you remember a guy like Joe? He's not a bad guy, right? He'll be on our side. And people, yeah, I think so. So, but I don't think I don't think it will be. I don't know about how they get rid of Biden. That's the real wild card.
Yeah, that is. And one of the things about RFK is that you were talking about the superdelegates. He was already experiencing that. He was talking about he might go third party the other day. He was mentioning he may have to go third party, which, again, that would be an interesting ordeal if you had him go third party. I'll tell you the one thing I've from a conservative point of view that I've heard him say that only Vivica said as well, is talking about the Vanguard BlackRock stranglehold, how they have both, you got 3 hedge fund companies that have 80% ownership of, they have majority ownership of over 80% of the top 5, what was it, S&P 500 companies, and they're going after the banks right now, and they're buying up all the homes. They're the cash buyers for all these homes that are using LLCs. So nobody else is talking about that, but I mean, that's a big problem when you got 3 guys using everybody else's money, by the way, their retirement money, to do all this. So
yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think you're exactly right. I think that is a very powerful argument and a real one, and I'm for it too. I mean, the centralization. When people say the globalists, and again, maybe Phyllis Schlafly got famous in 1964 because she wrote a book, and the book was called "A Choice, Not an Echo," and she basically said, I've been doing politics since the late 1940s, and every time we come into the room, you give us these losers, and we want a choice, not an echo of the last loser. And she wrote this book, and she sold 3.5 million copies out of her garage, and it became a sensation. And what she described was the globalists that were made up of people that wanted to feed Wall Street and not worry about small towns and all. It sounds really familiar to us. And she talked about that. And in there, she identified the Bilderbergers. You may have heard of the Bilderbergers term. She actually wrote about it for the first time, saying there was this meeting off on Sea Island, Georgia, I think it was, where these guys met from all over the world. And it was kind of like the WEF and others, a precursor to that. And what Phyllis's point was that the party structure, both parties now, she would write about this, are in the tank for the big money. Right? The system is set up in such a way. And so they won't identify. I mean, think about what happened with COVID. No matter what you think of any of the science, put it aside and just talk about the number of dollars that went to pharma companies. And was there any real scrutiny? Think about the amount of money that goes to Ukraine. And when Rand Paul said early on, let's make sure that we have a way to see where it went, they're like, oh, don't be such a pain. I mean, that's crazy. And now we know there's money missing all over the place. As you point out,
that, but how about weapons? Nobody was talking. I was shocked that nobody was talking about our guns that we were sending over to Ukraine. We're showing up at that with those Muslims who were trying to take over Paris about, what was it, about 8 weeks ago that they had the big riots in Paris? And
they reached 10%.
So I do think that when RFK Jr. points to that, it is powerful. I think you're right about that. I think it's helpful again for the debate.
Well, you've brought a lot of information, man. I've enjoyed having you, Ed. This is good stuff. Is there anything that you want to cover before we let you go?
Well, the one thing I was going to say for folks that are watching that might want to come down, we're at this Eagle Council, and if they can't come to this one on our website, we'll have the video of it if it's after the fact. But it's the 15th and 16th of September at the St. Louis Marriott, and we'll have, people do cattle calls, right? And CPAC has 4,000 people. We don't do cattle calls. We do sort of quality calls. And so there'll be a couple hundred people, and we'll have speakers on our education system, on pro-life. On Saturday night, it's a celebration of the January 6th, folks. There's going to be some family members of January 6th defendants. There's going to be at least 2 defendants, one guy who served his 30-day sentence, one guy who's waiting his trial, and they'll be there. And we're going to be that night celebrating the Constitution. The 17th of September is the 236th anniversary of the Constitution. And if your viewers are thinking, what's America? How are we going forward? The crown jewel of our nation is our Constitution and the rule of law, but not just that. Undergirding them is our Christian values. People like to say Judeo-Christian. I get it, but I mean, when I'm Christian, I know I incorporated the Judaic values that matter. But okay, fine. When people say, but I'd say Christian. The Christian values that at the heart of the founding, we have to recover and fight for that. And so on the anniversary of the Constitution, it's not just a really good document. It's underlying it was a sense of honor, of truth, of absolute truth, of knowledge, and getting ourselves to get on that same page is really important. So if people are interested, I mentioned to you off the air, we have a great donor who always this time of the event, he says, here's an extra bit of money, let some people come for free. And it's always great for us. So we have some extra tickets if people want to come down. If you go to eaglecouncil.com, you can see more and you can email through that. But certainly it's going to be a great weekend, and pray for our success. I'm not sure this year we'll get them. We usually get some protesters. Antifa snuck in once, and so keep your prayers up for us too.
We'll do that. And We'll put a link on the show to the website for both that and for the Team One Teen Eagles, so people can check those out if they've got a young person. Real quickly, give them a little bit about what Teen Eagles does, just so that people who we've kind of brought that up a few times. So
yeah. Teen Eagles. So Teen Eagles was a program that Phyllis started probably 25 years ago in St. Louis. It usually meets at the Pillar, the community there, and it's just what you think it is. It's formation on the conservative principles, but applied to politics, right? Because a lot of our folks were getting conservative principles, and so applying it to politics. And a lot of times we spin our people out of Teen Eagles into politics formally, either volunteering or even campaigning, you know. And so we have them in other states also, but it's the biggest one is in St. Louis, proximity to the office. And so it's kind of I'd say it's a conservative service organization that again brings conservative principles to politics. Again, I'm not interested. I'm happy to be conservative, talk about it. I want to figure out how to make it move in politics, and that's what we bring to it. Awesome.
So if listeners have some young folks who are maybe starting to ask questions and being engaged in politics, this would be a great opportunity to let them know about it and click on that. And then if they themselves want to get involved, whether through support of the foundation, going to the events, finding out about the events, we'll have the links for all that on the show notes, so they can check all that out and click right over. So,
if you ever have said that your niece or your son should be a little lawyer or a politician, send them to this thing.
That's right. Exactly. That's exactly.
It could be the next Ed Martin.
That's right.
So.
No, God help us.
We need more of you, Ed.
Yes, we do. I've really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you so much for being on today, Ed. And for those who are listening, don't forget to like and subscribe and support our guests who are on and support our sponsors. And we will catch you next episode.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, guys. Great to be with you. God bless.
Yeah, Ed. And if we can ever do anything to help you, let us know. And anytime you have an event coming in town, let me know, and we can put it out on our. If I'd known about that, I would have put it out on our YouTube page and our Facebook page and Twitter and all that stuff beforehand. So anything.
Well, and if you guys get free and want to swing by, just stop in. The most interesting to just stop by will be the afternoon and dinner on Saturday because of the J6. We'll have some families and there's a lot of energy around that. But any of it, if you look, I'll try to remember to send you the list of the speakers and all. But thank you for the chance and keep up the good work. And if we can help you, let us know as you guys go forward. Keep going. We'll help any way we can.
Are you still doing anything in the Missouri political forum, or are you just pretty much now just 100% there?
I got my hand in everywhere. I mean, Missouri's not a swing state, so it's not as important to me you got to be practical, right? So Josh Hawley's an old friend. He'll be fine. Whatever governor wins will be fine. Missouri's moving up on my list because they might put a ballot initiative on to try to codify abortion rights. So we may have to come in there more. But the next election, people forget this. I mean, we should have done this on the show. Trump won the election by 48,000 votes total against Hillary. He lost the election by 100,000 votes in 8 states. These are effectively ties, and you break a tie by having efforts in places where you need them. So there's really 6 or maybe 8 states. There's really 20 counties where the election in 2024 will be decided, and I've got to figure out how to make impacts in those places for maximum value right now, but we'll see.
Ballot harvesting.
That's right, exactly.
Just whatever the Democrats are doing, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what all the states that are legal. The ballot harvest, we should be ballot harvesting and do it better. They were always scared of it for a long time, that we were going to be the ones that would do it. And now they started doing it. We should go in those states and be the best at it. I always tell people, that's fine. Let them be the guys who first, drew first blood, but let's make sure we finish it. If they threw the first punch, just make sure you throw the last. Yeah. So
they don't play around.
I like it.
So
all right, guys. I got
Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate you.
God bless you guys. See you
too.
Thanks. Bye.
You're safe.